Salam, yogis and yoginis. Hello, welcome back. One more time, one more stream, and one more video on the mind. This is part of streams that I do regularly, weekly, but it's also part of a course that I'm running on the mind. Today is going to be one more part on this course, and we're going to be talking continuing from the conversation we were having the last time we were talking about the brain. We said that we were going to... Saddam Sohail Tabatabaye, hello, welcome. You are very punctual. It's nice to see you here. It's good to know that there is people listening out there. It's not just me talking to the void, to the ethers. So welcome to the stream. Today we're going to carry on with the video from the last time. We talked about... we're going to take an Eastern and a Western approach. We started with the brain, talking about the two hemispheres of the brain, which are the part that we are most aware of, because that's the part that is more engaged into regular thinking, because it involves both the logical thinking and the artistic thinking, and that's the part that we are most in contact with, because it's the part that is more conscious. We talked before about different other levels, but like subconscious and unconscious, but these are present. Sanam from Mallorca, Bea, Ju, hello, welcome, and GIY as well, hello. I'm glad to see here some of the regulars, and Bea from Mallorca. We are running a teacher training in Mallorca, and I think some of the students, very soon to be teachers, if not teachers already, are also part of the stream. So it's nice to see you here. And yeah, this is part of my motivation to do these streams and these videos, was to complement the actual teacher trainings that we run, where we have a very limited amount of time and we can only touch some subjects superficially. So in these streams, we can go much deeper. And I do have a topic to cover today. I have a topic that I would like to explore on the brain, but feel free, everyone, to just write in the chat any comment or any question, or just sharing something, and interact with me as I am commenting this. You've just finished, Bea. You finished the final weekend of the training, right? You finished the exam. I hope it went well. Did you pass? Are you certified now? I hope it went really well. And Lakmeet hasn't told me yet. Lakmeet is the person in charge of he's the organizer and the main organizer of the training, and he was in charge of doing the final exam. So I hope it went very well. Let us know. So today, as I was saying, this is what we covered the last video and the last week. We were talking about this butterfly brain, the left and the right hemispheres, and the two aspects of it. Now, this is the part of the brain that we are most aware of. As I mentioned in another video, this is we are semi-conscious about this. This is mostly about the cortex of the brain. But now we're going to go back. This mind course is a little bit jumping back and forth, and I hope it's okay with you. So just follow along. We're going to go back because we're going to talk about how did our brain become this evolved? How did it start? Where did it come from? And as you may have seen in the title of this video, we're going to go in the evolution from primates. Sorry, from how do you call that? Reptiles, all the way to yogic brain. So we're going to see that slowly, and we're going to use a model which is slightly outdated. It's called the triune brain, which this was Paul MacLean in the 1960s, was the person who started to create this model and promote it, and it became very popular because it's very easy to understand and it makes a lot of sense. And from a non-scientific mind, it's easy to understand what these different levels are. Now, ever since it was published in the 60s, of course, science has evolved quite a lot, and it is now regarded as a simplification, or maybe even an oversimplification of the many different ways that the brain is connected, and many structures which talk to each other, and how even more primitive brains will manifest some sort of primitive outer layers of the brain. So let's take this with a grain of salt, everything that we are going to talk about today. But even though it's a simplification, it's still useful because there is a progress, there is an evolution of the brain. And even though if it's not 100% the way this model presents, it's, as I said, easy to understand for those of us who are not neuroscientists and we just want to know the basics of how the brain evolved. Now, why is that important? Why should we even talk about reptile brain? Well, because the way it evolved is conditioning the way now a signal passes through the brain, and therefore how much priority do we give to a particular signal. So even though we are humans and we have a very evolved brain, a part of our brain is very primitive, and in some circumstances, that primitive part of the brain is going to take over and is not going to allow us to make good decisions, let's say. So if we understand how the brain operated, how the brain evolves, and therefore how it's operating, then we can understand where are we responding to a particular situation from. So which part of our brain are we coming from? And therefore try to get the best outcome. And then we have the yogic understanding on top of this, which will be relating what is happening linked to our chakras, which is very interestingly, there's a parallelism between the chakras and the structures of the brain. And that is going to give us one more layer of understanding and one more layer of response. What can we do with this? Because from the yogic perspective, we can change our behavior. I believe better than if we don't have that understanding. So it's necessary to bring the Western and the Eastern and merge them together. Just like in the last week, we talk about the butterfly brain and then, well, what can we do from yoga to find the balance in this butterfly brain? Or if we want to activate specifically one hemisphere or the other, what can we do from the perspective of yoga? So this is the idea. Yeah, today we're going to explore the evolution, and then how is this affecting us today? And then how can yoga can help us on these different layers? So I hope you're excited about this. I am. That's, every day I come here and I'm like, yes, I like doing this course. I enjoy it. And I hope that you feel the same way. So let's get on it. All right. So let's start by doing some drawings. Of course, I am Ardaas. I cannot start a course without drawings. It's a little bit of red here. Let me turn the page around. It's more white. And let me just move away some things. I'm still figuring out everything about the technology. I'm still not 100% how everything works. Hopefully soon I will be more proficient, but I had a false start. I started this stream and then I had to stop it. Okay, let me concentrate because I am a man and men hardly can do more than one thing at once. So let me see if I can make a reasonable drawing of the brain and its various structures. And you will see this is like, well, I don't know if you can see, this is the head. let me just make it clear if in case the drawing is not very, this would be, the head. Okay, just in case. So we are looking in this direction. The eyes would be looking in this direction. And we can see these structures coming up, something like that, like this. So I'm drawing let's start describing what I'm doing. This is going to be the cerebellum. It has some little things like that, all around. Cerebellum is part of the oldest part of the brain, linked to this, the brainstem. Let me put some words to that. This is the brainstem. And this is going to go down all the way into the body. Well, I don't know, there's a number of things here. There's going to be pituitary gland and more or less. Limbic system. Then the walnut. I don't know how detailed I want to do this. I'm just being very approximate, but there is these different layers. You can see folds and creases, and there's many of these things in the brain. Just trying to make it pretty a little bit. Okay, just kind of a brain, okay? I hope you can see it. So this would be, let's start with this, what I drew here first. This would be the cerebellum and the brainstem. This is what corresponds to the oldest part of the brain. This is the lizards, yeah? The reptile brain. So the oldest animals in the planet, as they were evolving, they started with a brain which would be kind of very reduced. This and a little bit more. And yes, they could do a few other functions, but it was quite reduced. We have the next layer. Let's make it green. And this model was traditionally called the triune brain. And as I said, it's from the 60s. I think it was Paul MacLean. Well, Dr. Paul MacLean, yeah. Triune brain. But triune means three. And today I'm going to suggest that there are actually 4 parts. Well, I'm not going to make anything up. I'm just going to say that there is like 3 levels as animals and then 1 level of the animal brains that has evolved the most, which is the part that is more human. Hold on. Excuse me. So this green thing, which it's actually a bit longer. Yeah, I drew it a bit smaller, but it was a bit longer, would be the limbic system. And it's part of the mammal brain. So the mammals, the animals, the mammals. And then the final cortex and the neocortex. This would be this area. Something like that. That would be primate. So the primates, this is cortex. And the neocortex, yeah, neo as well. But there is also an area of the brain which is the part that is more evolved as humans. First, I'm just defining all the points, and then I will explain in detail what they are. Yeah. Then this in the front. This is better seen in another diagram, maybe from above, but let's put it like this: the prefrontal cortex, and this will be more the human. This is the part that we have more evolved as humans. So I'm just taking like 4 layers, 4 levels. Yeah. And so, as I mentioned, the very first animals would be the reptiles, like lizards and snakes. And so this very primitive area of the brain, the reptile brain, what was the first function of a brain? The brain is the command center for the whole body, and it has to be in charge of making sure that the body works and that we survive. Oh, I see comment. Yes, it went fantastic. Why we do after a session with you, we will do we will do a class of yoga with some friends. Looking forward to cover this subject. Yes, nice, Bea. Thank you. I'm glad it went well. Yeah, why you know. Class of yoga with some friends. Well, yeah, let's take any opportunity you find to meet and establish the sangat and just practice, or just meet together and have some food. Just have some fun. Yeah, that's important as well. All right, so reptilian brain. Now, that part of the brain is a very instinctual, very instinctive, very, very basic survival kind of brain. Yeah, it's more concerned with how are we gonna continue the species. This is the main objective of this part of the brain. And when I'm talking about the reptile brain, I'm talking about the kind of brain that reptiles had, but I'm also talking about this particular structure on our brain. That's what it's concerned with. So I don't know, maybe sometimes I feel like I'm writing too much because most people are looking at this through a mobile phone and maybe it's too small. But in case anybody wants to see it in a computer and you can see it in bigger, we would see this is the more instinctual. And it would be, so instinctual means that this is like the basic fight or flight. Mechanisms. Yeah, you may have heard about this fight or flight, and it's also about instinctual and it's concerned with territorial. So you don't want just to survive, but you want to establish yourself. You want to establish dominance. You want to establish this is my area. This is where I live. This is my space. So it goes kind of hand in hand with the survival aspect. It's because we need to survive, and this is the command center for the whole body. This is the part of the brain that is going to regulate, how would I call it, autonomic functions. Autonomic functions. So this is regulating breathing, regulating blood pressure, and any kind of automatic thing that the body has to do by itself in order to survive. So when to digest, when not to digest, when to relax, and all those things. This is all controlled from this area of the brain. But also some basic motor functions. And I will go more in detail about this in a moment. Yeah, let me just, I introduce the parts, let me say a little bit about them, and then we will go another level into more depth on these ones. But yeah, this is the reptile brain. This is not in discussion, yeah? There is no doubt that these are the functions that they do. It's just that when we talk about this is the reptile and this is the mammal, in reality, we would see some reptiles that have some components of the mammals, and the mammal, well, it's a little bit more mixed together than it looks here, and the structures are more complex, and there's more interconnectivity between the different areas. And I am not a neuroscientist, so take all this with a pinch of salt, as I mentioned. Now, limbic system, mammals. Mammals are they don't put eggs. The mothers stay with the babies and nurture them much more than the reptiles, even though there is a lot of examples of reptiles also. They take care of the babies as they are born and as they are maturing. But somehow the jump into mammals creates the possibility for a new layer of the brain that is much more concerned with the survival as well, but it has created other mechanisms that help survival, particularly emotions. So emotions are actually very useful for survival as well. If you have a number of emotions, are basically just hormones in the body, yeah? So if you have a number of hormonal mechanisms that are gonna help you to survive, then why not go into that, no? So for example, let's say there is a number of hormones that trigger as we are spending time with other people. that these hormones are pulling us towards having some sort of social interactivity. Why would that be interesting in terms of survival? Well, survival of the species and survival of the person, because remember, particularly in the olden times, but even today, yeah? But let's look back. When we were living in tribes, we are tribal people, yeah? In order to survive, because we have, when we are at the mercy of the elements, when we have to spend a year when the weather may be very harsh, when maybe we have some wild animals attacking your tribe, we need the whole community to gather up to defend each other. So, in order to promote this, the brain has evolved some particular sections of the brain which have generated these, what we call emotions, these feelings, these sensations that when we are with other people, we feel great. So if we have a hormone in our body that is going to create that sensation, it's going to make us want to be more with other people, and therefore we're going to create this sense of community, much more than other animals which just are happy to live alone and to live separate. Yeah, as mammals, we tend to gather together and protect each other and live in a close proximity. And there is all these emotions that are going to come up as we are living in that proximity. So emotions are also brain mechanisms that are going to help for survival, but somehow they don't stay with survival, but they stay into something else, something beyond just surviving, which is now we don't want to just survive, we want to also be happy. Yeah, the concept of being happiness, the pursuit of happiness, right? That means that I'm not just concerned about surviving, and these are the mechanisms that are going to be more active as we progress as a society and as humans. Nowadays, most of us don't live in a war zone. Most of us who are not living in a constant struggle to find food to put on your plate, then the basic survival mechanisms should be calm, should be covered, and then our concerns are more for emotional satisfaction and feeling of peace and feeling of well-being and things like that. So this area of the brain, which is concerned with emotions, this is going to be very, very significant, the impact that it has on us. So let me just write here a few things. Emotional processing, and regulation, yeah. I'm just abbreviating. And you know what? This area of the brain is also connected to things like memory, formation and storage, and about learning. A particular kind of learning, yeah? Sometimes which have to do with emotions. So, for example, if we think about the oldest memories we have in our lives, maybe you will remember some particular situation that was emotionally significant. Maybe you went to see the snow for the first time, or maybe something particularly happened with your father or your mother or your whatever, no? There's generally an emotional component that is going to help the recording, the storage of that particular memory, comparison with the others. How many memories do we have when we are 4 years old, when we are 5 years old, 6 years old? Probably you have a bunch of them, just a handful of them. In everything that happened when you were 6 years old, why do you only remember 5, 6, 7 things? Well, then those things which get recorded have some sort of emotional component to those. And it can be in both directions, because emotions can be very polar in the manifestation. Either I am enjoying that, or this is something that I'm not enjoying, and then it's causing me suffering in some way. So therefore we have beautiful, bright feelings and happiness or joyful or peaceful. These kind of emotions may come up, and therefore that memory gets recorded, but you may have also a memory which is associated to some traumatic, painful experience that gets stored much to our to go against us, right? Sometimes we wish we could just delete that memory, but it somehow got stored very deeply, and that's because the limbic system is in charge of that storing as well. So storing a memory is linked to learning something, because why would you want to remember a particular experience that is painful? Well, very easy. Very simple answer. Because you want to not have it again. You want to not go through the same experience again. So the brain records, look, this is what happened, and that was the result. You felt this pain because of that experience. So be careful and don't go into that experience again. This is learning, yeah? But also fun. You know, fun is also an ingredient. Look at this experience that you had. Look at how much fun you had. So go back and have more experiences like this. So this is another learning, yeah? We are supposed to learn from both experiences. Now, at some point in our lives, we have forgotten this. I mentioned this before in the other video. And now we go into university and maybe we have to study some particular subject that we are not having fun with. Who knows? Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to say something that, but I will say statistics, for example. I don't know. Maybe you don't enjoy statistics, yeah? Or maybe, I don't know, anything, any subject, right? And we are expected to take the book, to go to the library, to put your elbows down and to memorize that. And how do we expect the brain to memorize things when the emotional component is probably one of dissatisfaction rather than one of enjoyment, right? So having fun is something that goes hand in hand with learning. And you don't want to having to learn something like statistics and associate a negative feeling to that, because then you're going to be in a negative mood to approach the topic, and that's going to decrease the capacity to actually not just remember it when you need it, but also to enjoy it. And then let's imagine that you want to trigger a negative emotion when you are learning something like statistics, no? Okay, you're going to learn it as well in some ways, because negative emotions also help to learn, but it's traumatic. Do you want to be a statistician with a traumatic baggage behind? You know, some people do it. They go through a degree just because they have to get the degree, but they are unhappy people, yeah? We don't want that. So if you want to be happy, whatever you do, why not have fun doing it? That's probably going to help, isn't it? So schools, even from children, you know, when children are very young, schools which are going to promote the happiness and the fun while they are studying, they are actually playing, that's when they're going to learn the most. And that's because this limbic system is going to be active in a positive state, in a positive way, yeah? And this is going to be linked to the amygdala, to the pituitary. The pituitary, also the amygdala, yeah? I haven't mentioned it, but amygdala as well. Let me put it here. There's actually here I mentioned the cerebellum and the brainstem. In this limbic system, we're going to have the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus. The hippocampus is the one that forms new memories, and it takes care of also some like spatial navigation, knowing how to navigate in the world. The hypothalamus, it's also in charge of basic bodily functions, and it's also in connection with emotional responses. And the amygdala is basically, am I afraid? And am I feeling pleasure? So that polarity I was talking about before, no, about something that I'm enjoying or that I'm afraid of. And this is an interesting connection, because the amygdala triggering, it's very, you cannot control it, right? It just happens. So some particular situation may make you feel disgust, like that. And then, you know, there's a particular movement of the mouth on how we feel disgust. Yeah, there is this curling of the lips, and there is this particular phase that we do when we feel disgust. This is trigger linked to the amygdala, like something that you want to pull away with. It can be connected to the it's connected to something more primitive, which is sensing that something could possibly be dangerous. So, for example, if we see a spider, and there could be a mixture of fear and disgust, because we can feel disgust from some insects, and that's a protective layer because we don't know if the spider is venomous, right? Poisonous. So if the spider is, we want to protect ourselves. So there is this mechanism in the brain that is going to disgusting, yes, and fearful, and there are different expressions of fear and disgust, but we are going to record them in our face. And part of this is why should we want to show this in the face? Again, because for the survival of us as a species, we want to communicate this to others when even we don't have words to speak. There's this basic reptile brain, which is the fight or flight. It has other two F's as well, feeding and reproduction. That's the fourth F. Yeah. So this part is for my survival. But remember, we live in a community. So in a community, when you can be fighting or flying, or there's another F that sometimes is said when you are approached by a predator, which is freeze, fight or flight or freeze. Yeah, you see a lion and you get frozen. Now, in that getting frozen, imagine that you live in a community and you detect the danger. Now, how can we communicate that to the others when we cannot speak? Well, in that frozen moment, our face will show that emotion that we were just experiencing. So if it's disgust, or being it fear and surprise, which makes us lift our eyebrows, somebody in the tribe, and they see you with that face, and lifting the eyebrows has a number of advantages because it opens your field of view to see better. Now, if there is a dangerous situation, you want to be opening the eyes to see better what's happening and to see what can you do. So I am seeing you with that face. And part of my brain is designed to copy. There's a big area of the brain which is just basic, I think it's called, how is it called? Mirror neurons, I believe. Don't take me 100%, but I think that's what it's called. So neurons which are programmed to mirror you. So as they see that face, you yourself start doing that face. Now, when you start raising the eyebrows, that's going to create two things. One, it's going to start to prepare you to see where the danger is, but it's also going to trigger in you the surprise and also a couple of things. Start triggering the hormones that are necessary for you to survive. And another is, I'm like an antenna and I'm going to resend the signal to somebody else who may also see my face now. So you are in danger, you put your face, the face is surprised and disgust. Now I see it, I show that face, and now somebody else in the tribe may see that face. Now everybody knows that something is happening, and then maybe, whoever is the warrior in charge of defending against a possible tiger, maybe will come. Maybe it's just a spider, but you don't know. So GIY says, struggle a lot with this and surrender. My brain has learned trauma response. When energies rise within, I know I'm okay, but body is respond like it is under threat. We're going to talk about this today in detail. I've been stuck in shutdown for some time, trying many methods to try to change the hard wiring, but all you are saying resonates. I mean, you used exactly the word hard wiring, because this is the hardware of us. I mentioned the other day, the brain is the hardware. The mind is like the software. And then the spirit and the consciousness is like the electricity that runs everything. So in our consciousness, we may want to change something, and then we're going to try to go into the software, the mind, on how to deal with that. But some issues, particularly if there has been some trauma, recorded in the brain, that's even hardwired. At the level of the brain, we are going to see some connections that have been created through a number of neurons that this is hardware. How can we change that? If we want to heal the trauma, we're going to have to get to that level. And that level is not on the surface. This is not conscious. This is not something that I can just choose and say, okay, from now on, I will never feel trauma again. It doesn't work like that. We have to go to those layers and deal with them. So that's why understanding how the structure works helps us. And then I will bring some yogic tools on how to deal with this. Yeah, I already mentioned some yogic tools when I was talking about the levels of consciousness, but this is the whole course. So we have to go slowly, little by little, to build an understanding of why is this happening. And I believe that understanding how it happens can help us have an influence on that. So yes, thank you. And we will try to see what can we do, when we are shutting down, when we're feeling shut down. But there is a part of this is about training. There is a number of factors. One is sometimes we perceive something that, like you are saying, I respond like it is under threat, as if I was in front of a lion when actually there is no lion. So partly is one thing is this, that our brain is going to trigger the most basic primitive response, and the disgust and the fear of the limbic system that goes accompanying this. And that's gonna, as I mentioned, this is the evolution of the brain. As that is triggering, then this outer layer of the brain is gonna be shutting down. And then we're gonna operate from here. We're gonna go into this a bit more. GIY says, mine is mostly childhood trauma from an age I cannot remember what I am responding to. Yes, many traumas start in childhood. And actually, this is the thing. Sometimes we don't even remember what it was. What you are mentioning, sometimes we just know we have some particular trauma. We just know that in particular circumstances, we react in a dismesurate way, like in a disproportionate way. That little thing happens and then it triggers a big monster out of me, and maybe I don't even know where it started. But also from yoga we say maybe we don't even need to know where it started, and we can just change that without needing to go back to that place, because we come into psychotherapy and particularly psychoanalysis, if you want to go into that. Some people will go into psychoanalysis and they will regress to that part of their life and they will understand what happened when they were little, and they may, speaking it, heal it and move on. But some people may go into that kind of psychoanalysis and they may get stuck into that for 10, 15, 20 years, going to psychoanalysis, reliving the same experience. So going again and talking a bit to the therapist, what happened and how traumatic it was, and they cry, and the psychoanalyst tries to help them move on, but it's like a re-patterning, re-imprinting the same memory again and again. So it's just re-imprinting the same. I just had a little disconnection. I think I lost a few seconds. Hopefully you got the whole message. And we will explore more of this on the course. But let's continue and see a bit more of how this works. So I was talking about all this. I also mentioned the pituitary. The pituitary gland is the master gland of all the other glands of the body. So whatever is happening and whatever decision is made, then that's going to be communicated to the whole body. Why is that? Well, because if we feel a strong fear and we need to react accordingly, we don't want the body to be involved in unnecessary things like digesting the apple that you just ate. The body needs to react to what's happening. And if what's happening is dangerous enough, we don't have to worry about digestion. The blood should go to the organs that are needed. And so, and maybe the muscles to be ready to run or whatever. So there is a whole thing of this connected to the stress mechanism. I mentioned a little bit about this on the video on stress, relaxation, and vitality. There's this triangle that is created between the three. It's a video I did some time ago, but you can check it in the channel. But this is a mechanism that is gonna have to get the whole body ready for whatever it has to deal with, and that starts from up here. So maybe we sense that we have to fight or fly, but then it may go into the motion, and maybe it's staying between these two layers. But if we allow ourselves to move on to the cortex and neocortex, this is when we can evolve. By the way, the drawing we were doing on the butterfly brain, this is where we would come into it now. No? So if we took this cortex and we looked it from above, and we could see that this diagram, yeah, and the left one being more logical, and the right one more artistic. But also you remember that the right one was more emotional. So it's interesting that the right hemisphere of the brain would be, let's say, more in contact with the limbic system, and what is happening in this deeper layer. So that's kind of from the deep limbic connecting to the right hemisphere, and then the left one being logical. So this is kind of happening at the same time that this is happening. So as we go into the cortex and neocortex, this is where we have the higher functions. Thinking, reasoning, understanding, problem solving. This is much more complex. You don't see generally, and I say generally because when we go into this very primitive brain, we have seen that there is some animals who use very primitive kind of problem solving kind of attitude, or maybe using instruments, When we go to these very, very simple brains, there is a number of animals, like there is some birds who will pick a rock with the beak and then use the rock to break maybe an egg to eat the inside. So there is very, very, very primitive layer of using instruments. That using an instrument shows a very evolved kind of brain. But as we are going up into the mammals, for example, you will find elephants who are just, they are itchy. They will just grab a branch with the trunk, break it, and just scratch themselves. So that's like very easy for them just to make this connection. But as we are evolving higher and higher, we go into primates. We will see primates using much more any kind of instrument and tools, and evolving other functions which we can associate much more to humans. No? We are much closer to humans. We can see the primates communicating very well, even doing sign language with the hands. And so they show that they can think, they can reason, they can understand, they can communicate, they can solve problems. So all of that is up in this cortex and neocortex, including language processing and understanding and producing it, and some, let's say, abstract thinking. Thinking about thinking, and thinking and creative thinking. So this is all within the cortex and the neocortex. And as I mentioned, the triune model, this is 3 layers, no? Reptile, mammal, and the primate. But I wanted to make like one more step, which is like the human, the prefrontal cortex. Because within the cortex and the precortex, we have a number of layers. There is the temporal, which is on the side, and the parietal lobe. The temporal is more about memories, about language. We would have to see this from above again to see, but on the side we would be working on the memory and language and hearing, because this area of the side is connected to the ear, so it's about hearing and processing what we hear. What else? Parietal lobe, which is more in the top. This is about processing what comes from the senses. You may have seen a drawing of it's called the homunculus, which is like a little human, but with big hands, big lips. Yeah, so they make every part of the body as big as it is sensitive. So the lips are very sensitive, so it has very big lips. The tongue, a very long, very big tongue. So this is the part of the brain that is going to sense what is coming from the senses, right? Particularly the sense of touch, because the hearing hearing would be more associated to the temporal lobe, and the vision would be occipital lobe here in the back. So the top would be more about the feelings. And so you see that a lot of the brain is about senses. Yeah, it's connected to the senses that is going in the eyes, as I mentioned. The image, what we see from the eyes, is going to go into the back of the brain, and it will be processed here. So here is where we see the images. But there is the front of it, the frontal lobe. Out of all this is all the senses. But if you go more to the front, this is where you make most of the decision making. This is where you have more of the problem solving. And this is where there is a lot of the social interactions. So these aspects, it's not that they are not in the primates. Many of them, as I mentioned, they start with the primates. Particularly the social interaction starts with primates. But as we go forward, this is the area of the brain that is more evolved as humans. So there is a much more higher number of neurons, and therefore the possibility to have a more complex thinking related to that part of the brain linked to problem solving and decision making. Now, decision making, to make a decision, that means that you are conscious. Because you don't make decisions when you are in the subconscious. In the subconscious, you are reacting to things. In the conscious is where you are making decisions. So here is where we see how in the most frontal part of the brain, this is where consciousness is being more activated. Yeah? Does it make sense? If we go deeper into the brain, there's less consciousness. How are you hearing this? If you wanna say something, just write it in the chat if you're hearing this. If you're just watching the video recorded, you can write in the comments in the comments of the video. Let me know if there is any question on these 4 levels, I would say, like 4 levels of evolution. Well, so if there is these 4 levels, why is this important? Because how we receive the information from the world and how we operate from that information, that's going to be prioritized through these 4 levels. What do I mean by that? Let's say that if we were to, I wasn't planning to do it like this, but let's go down the brainstem. And we go up into our hands. Yeah, somehow down here is our arm and is our hand. Yeah, it's a very poor hand. But let's say you touch something that is burning. Yeah. There's some fire here. Now, what happens is, as the skin of the finger touches this, the sensor going into the brainstem, into the spine, the brain, even at this level, it doesn't even have to go up into the brain. Even from the brainstem, there's going to be a reflex to pull away the finger, not to get burned. I think this is called, I believe it was called reflex. I think it's called reflex arc, something like that. But this kind of reflex doesn't even get to the brain. So the decision to pull away is even before getting to the brain. Now, and this is a sensory feeling, yeah? This is the sense of touch. Now, whether the sense of touch or whether any of the other senses are detecting something that is dangerous, this is dangerous, so the movement has to be immediate, yeah? There is some other sensor that tells us that we are in danger and we have to react. There's going to be we're going to go higher into the brain, and then if the sense of fight or flight response, yeah, which is, I wouldn't call it even response, I would call it almost like a reflex as well. It's almost like a reflex. Because we cannot control it, yeah? So just like this, if you try to stay still and touch the fire and not move the hand away, it takes an incredible amount of willpower and energy from the top of the brain to command your hand to stay in its place. Because everything in your mechanism, the brain mechanism, has been hardwired to pull away. So in order for us to hold the hand in place, it takes an incredible amount of will, and not everybody can do it. You could train yourself to do it, but not everybody can do it. And you would harm yourself. You would get third-degree burns. But yeah, if you want to train yourself, you can do that. Yeah. But generally, this is automatic and we cannot stop it. If we see a lion, if we truly saw a lion, everything shuts down. And that's a reflex as well. Just like pulling away with the hand, we cannot control that. Now here, you and I, when we are listening, you're listening to this YouTube video, or I'm just talking, we can think a fantasy. We can play a beautiful fantasy in our heads. If someday a lion came, I would be brave. I would take a sword and I would fight the lion and protect my family. But we don't know. If a lion truly came and we were in the face of it, who knows if we would be able to actually respond in any graceful way, really. All the mechanism of survival would trigger. And when this mechanism from this deeper layer triggers, it's like all this area of the brain gets shut down, and the response comes from here. Especially if this is something unusual. Now again, just like you can train yourself to control the hand and keep the hand touching the fire, you can train yourself through exposure to deal with a stressful situation like that and manage your stress enough to be able to, and familiarize yourself enough with the circumstance to be able to have a higher level processing, which is likely to have a better response, than just freezing in place, for example. But it would take training. Now, this is exactly what they do in military. In military, they put you in circumstances, they do tests, and they put you in a war games, so that when you are actually in the war, you can learn through the training, you can revert to the most basic training to do what you have to do, rather than just freeze in place and not fight. No? In the military, they want you to fight when you are in the war, so they're going to expose you, they're going to throw bullets at you or make the sound of bullets, even if they are not real. Sometimes they will be, sometimes they will not. No matter what, they're going to expose you. This is exposure therapy. They're going to expose you to the thing that scares you to be able to go through that consciously, and then you gather your courage, let's say. So if somebody was completely new and they were thrown into the military, which is something that happens when there is like like for example in the Second World War, and I was reading on that how sometimes they just had to get new recruits and throw them into the battlefield very quickly. They had no proper training. Then you're there in the battlefield, they have a gun, but they cannot do anything. They freeze in place. And so there is a lot of that. So the military is in charge of reconditioning the brain to make sure that when they are exposed to the actual threat, they can respond to that. Okay. So let's do a little bracket here. Let's open a little bracket, because this is said, no, in the moments of great stress, when things matter, we don't respond from our higher self, but we revert to the most elevated. This is the things with the live recordings that sometimes unexpected things happen. But where was I? When we are in the extreme situation, we revert to the training. We don't. It's not easy to get the best out of yourself when we're in a situation like this. Often we go to the how have we trained ourselves to deal with things. That's why the military training is so specific. But if you think of a yoga class now as being yogis, very often you can see a yoga class like a training as well. When we put ourselves in a position that is hard, with the legs up, for example, and holding with the breath of fire or whatever, this is kind of like going through a difficult situation. But there is a big difference between being in the middle of a war and being in a yoga class lifting your legs, right? The difference is, first of all, you chose to do it. And that is a massive difference in the brain. There is studies on this, on putting two mice on a wheel, the wheel that turns. It's a very interesting experiment. Horrible experiment for the poor mice. Yeah, but they had to do two little hamsters, and then they have a wheel spinning. Yeah. So the thing is, when you are in that wheel, there was another hamster, or there was another engine. There was an engine, a motor, to turn the wheel by itself. So you cannot control it. So you would find that the wheel was spinning, and you could not stop the wheel. Now, if that happens, you cannot control it, and you cannot stop it, and therefore you cannot enjoy it. So being exposed to this kind of situation is very stressful for the mice. And a mouse that is in a wheel, that is forced to run in that wheel, he will experience all the symptoms of stress. And there will be all sorts of biological manifestations. This study showed all the effects of the stress on the poor mouse. But another mouse choosing to go on the wheel and running on the wheel, he's doing exercise, the endorphins are secreting, and there's going to be a lot of nice effects of doing exercise. So the difference between running on a wheel, on a treadmill, how is it called? Treadmill. I think it's called treadmill. Running in a treadmill, that you choose to do it or you don't choose to do it, the difference is completely radical. It's the difference between feeling stress and being punished and then feeling depleted the resources and exhausted, or doing exercise and actually strengthening the muscles and strengthening many parts of the brain. So the difference is completely the opposite. Similarly, when we choose to go to a yoga class and we expose ourselves to situations which are stressful, staying with the legs up, that's stressful for the body. However, we chose it, then we are going to gather all the benefits of that training session. We are gathering all the muscle tone and the willpower that we learn from being able to do it. When you finish, you have the satisfaction. I did it. I held on. I managed to do it. This is like victory, right? And you get all these beautiful emotions, and therefore, endorphins and all the other hormones triggering through the body. And because you have been exposed to a stressful situation consciously and you managed to gather your willpower to survive it, which was very simple, it was just a yoga class, but because you did it, if out of the yoga class you find yourself in a stressful situation, next time it happens, you have trained yourself not to have a defeatist mentality, but actually to get the best out of yourself and gather your courage, let's say. So in many ways, a yoga class is similar to a military training. And when you are in the yoga class in situations that are difficult and you have to get, sometimes we do these meditations, like with the arms like this for 31 minutes or for 62 minutes. And that's really painful. And it's not even whether the body can do it or not. Most of the pain happens in the mind. Most of the pain is in the mind. But if you spend, 1 hour doing this, or sometimes we do one whole day of meditations, are intensive meditations, arms up, arms to the side, then the arms like this, then the arms like that, and you are chanting some mantras. The mantras are also helping to get the most higher part of the brain activated, yeah? So calling on the higher brain. As you are holding like a whole day of these kind of meditations, first, when you finish, you feel like a superhuman, having overcome these great, terrible things. And it's really, really challenging for the mind. For the body, sometimes it's not so much, but the mind is like, why am I here? Because you chose to be there. You could go anytime, but you are there. So the man is like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? I could go home, but I'm not going to go home. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to do it. So you establish your commitment and you crystallize that so strongly that the willpower that you get from that is incredible. Now, after that, anytime you're in life and you face a crisis and a difficult situation, and maybe you are home ready to go to bed and your best friend calls you and they're in the hospital and they need help, and then you were already exhausted from the whole day, but you need to go, you are there, you are ready, and you have energy and you have the stamina and you have the courage to go and do what you have to do. And you have a memory. If that day, that incredible day that we spent the whole day with the arms up, that day I could do it and I had the strength to do it, today I can do this. So we are building that kind of attitude. When we are doing yoga, we're building the attitude of the courage of the warrior. Because yoga trains you to be two things, the saint and the warrior, yeah? And these two faces. And sometimes we just bring up the saint face with the heart and the warmth and the love and devotion and compassion and empathy. And some situations in life require to bring the other side and get the courage and the willpower and the commitment and the stand up for truth and fight if we have to. So this is very powerful, that yoga can bring us these two capacities. And also one thing, not only you are able to match the stressful situation in the moment, but because in the yoga class you train yourself to go into stress and then to relax. That's critical, yeah? Every yoga class, yeah, tapas, yeah, says DIY, yeah, this is the fire. The tapas is the fire not the Spanish tapas that we eat. in yogic terms, tapas is the fire that is going to burn karmas, let's say, yeah? So, because in the yoga class, we manage to go into stress and then relax consciously, which is why in every yoga class, specifically every physical yoga class, there should be a relaxation. Because you know how to stress, activate, and relax, whenever the day comes that we have to gather that courage and that strength and that willpower to go and meet the demands of whatever is happening out there, maybe your friend in a hospital, whatever, after the situation is finished, you can consciously, slowly go back to a relaxed state and heal, rejuvenate, regenerate, recycle all the garbage that came up through that and recuperate from the experience. Instead of staying with panic for a week afterwards, after a traumatic experience or a difficult experience. So this is how the yoga sessions train us to deal with life later on. I think there was some quote, I don't remember where I read it, but it was like, every drop of blood shed in the training grounds, every drop of sweat, every drop of sweat shed in the training grounds is one less drop of blood shed in the battlefield. Something like that. I am making a mess out of the quote, but you get the gist, yeah? So this is the importance of yoga, the practice of yoga for when we have to deal with things in real life. So something happens in real life. If it's on the most primitive level, we are not going to have a control of that unless we train for that. If it's going to trigger into the most instinctual layer of fight or flight or freeze mechanism, mostly we will not have any kind of control unless we train ourselves to deal with this, which is where the yoga starts to have an effect on, yeah? If we go a bit more higher and there is a strong emotions being released, and the amygdala emotions, remember, this is the pleasure or the fear of the disgust or the pull in or the pull away kind of triggering. So if we go into this layer, then this is the kind of emotional behavior that is going to happen. This is not a reflect. This is called a reaction. Sometimes you may call it like an emotional reaction, yeah? So these are reactions. These are reflexes. These ones and these ones These ones don't even get to the brain. These ones go to only the lower layer of the brain, from a reflex to a reaction. Unless you really train yourself for that, mostly all of this happens in the unconscious or subconscious layer of the brain, meaning that you have no control over that. Now, when we did that video on the layers of consciousness, and if you are watching this in the order of the playlist that we have on the brain, this will come on a little bit later, but the video is already recorded. We were talking about how we have an effect on what is happening on the semi-conscious or conscious level. And everything that is happening on the subconscious or unconscious, we cannot control it directly. So all this, when we are talking about an emotional reaction, this is when a part of us that triggers coming from the subconscious, the garbage that has accumulated there, and we have no control over that. So this is why it's important that we train ourselves that when these emotions trigger, that we are capable of still rising to the surface, rising to the consciousness, and from the consciousness evaluate and see what is happening on the subconscious and choose what kind of response we have. This is when we come into the response. So reflexes, reactions, responses. So this is the one that is going to have consciousness, particularly if we come from the prefrontal cortex. This is when the response is going to be much more conscious. When we can choose what we want to do with that. So somebody is insulting you, somebody is on your face, and they are angry and they are very reactive. Something happened and they are like showing an emotional reaction. And because of our mirror neurons, this is going to trigger us on a biological level, on a hardware level, and that part of our brain will want us to get angry. And then we start a fight because we are in such a situation. You know, maybe some car cuts you down and then you crash into them, and then they come out of the car and they say you are guilty and they start trying to pick a fight. They are in the most primitive reptile area of the brain, and this, through the emotional reaction of the anger, and in us can trigger either the fear or the anger as well. And because of the mirror neurons, a part of us is going to want to respond from here. And remember, this is not a response, this is a reaction. So if we allow ourselves to go into the reaction, now we have a fight, and now we are behaving like animals, literally, yeah? However, if you train yourself enough, cleaning, and this is something we watch in the personal minds, cleaning the negative mind with the garbage of the subconscious, if we train the positive mind to pay attention to what's happening and choosing what we want to do, if we awaken the neutral mind, so I'm talking about consciousness, if we have trained ourselves, maybe through yoga and these difficult postures that we do sometimes in yoga, the car crash happens, the guy comes out and is like a monster, it feels like a lion. It will feel like a lion. It will trigger the lion protection mechanism in the brain. The guy is coming to you and you can hold on from your consciousness and choose what you want to do. And then from there, you have to choose what's the best action. But you will choose it. It's not, you will not react, which if you react, everything is absolutely karmic. It's going to be just karma. But if you can choose, then you are in a position to choose the dharmic option. And the dharmic option can be anything. It can be, you know what? You come for me, I'm not going to let you beat me. I'm going to defend myself. And then maybe you are going to, bring out the sword, but consciously, yeah? And maybe you will avoid the worst of the karma, yeah? Or maybe you will not even generate karma if you are just in this defense and neutral. Or maybe you will find a different alternative. Maybe you will find a way to get the situation, calm down, bring it down a notch, and being able to reasonably deal with it in a more human way without resorting to punches, right? So if you are in this conscious level, if you are able to activate this higher area of the brain, then you may be able to learn how to deal with a situation which normally would trigger my own reaction and respond in a dharmic way. So this is what another level in which yoga can help us when this is happening. But remember, if we don't train for that, as soon as this part of the brain activates, this one shuts down. And then we are in a reaction, then we are in a fight, then we are... And particularly if something, what GIY was saying before, if it's hardwired in the brain, if it was a traumatic experience, and you are with your partner, and your partner says something, and the triggering happens, and the trauma from the past is triggered, right? And then now we are in the most primitive part of the brain, then we are going to fight, and that's going to be karmic, and there's no elevation from that, there's nothing healing, there's nothing learned, yeah? So that's why it's important that we train ourselves to stop the emotional reactions and consciously choose what we want to do with that. And I'm not saying repress emotions, that's not it. I already talked quite a bit about emotions and how some emotions need to be contained, some emotions need to be expressed, and the art of being human, an emotional human, is learning when to express the ones that have to be expressed and contains the ones that have to be contained, and not the other way around. Most of the problems come when we contain an emotion that needs to be expressed, when we express an emotion that needs to be contained. So being able to consciously manage these emotions will come from a higher level of processing, from the higher layer of the brain operating on these lower layers. And this will come also very much in relevance when we are facing a situation in which there is no lion. This is where the other one aspect comes, no? GIY was saying, no, I know I'm okay, but the body is responding like it is under threat. It's exactly like this. You are with your spouse or whatever, or your boss, or somebody in the street who cuts you off with a car, and then your brain will say, this is a lion in front of you, when actually it's not. Your life is not at risk. I'm saying sometimes life is at risk. Okay, I'm not talking about those. I'm talking when we perceive something as extremely stressful, when actually it doesn't have to be. And then all the mechanisms will trigger, and the thing is, for the brain does not understand when something is real and where something is not, because the mind is very powerful. And now I'm talking about the relationship between the hardware and the software. So look, if through my conscious mind, I see my boss, and I label the boss as a lion, and it's going to start triggering a mechanisms of fear. Oh my God, he's going to fire me, and I'm going to have, I'm going to lose my license, or I'm going to lose my job, and I'm going to have no money, and then how am I going to feed my family? And the imagination, the fantasy, which is a high level processing kind of thing, it starts to go on. If we allow it, if we allow the imagination, the fantasy to go on with that image, the boss turns into a lion. And the moment we see the boss as the lion, the software has sent a signal to the hardware saying, we are in danger. And now the hardware will start triggering in the way that it has to do it, because it has been programmed by thousands of years of evolution. So now the lower parts of the brain trigger, and now the higher functions collapse, and now we are in a full emotional reaction. So being able to see reality as what it is key, so that we can have manage our responses, not reactions or reflexes. All right. That was important. That was quite heavy, but it's a very important point. And let me just make another connection to this. Now we looked at it through it as layers of the brain, but there's something that we could also connect it in some way, which is that you may have, well, let me put another page, because this one has the brain behind. Let me see. Oh my God, that's terrible. Okay, never mind. It's just terrible. Should be like this, but okay. Never mind. Okay, so we have, I want to be quick, I don't know why. Maybe I'm feeling stressed a little bit, just talking about stress. I have activated myself. I'm feeling like myself a little bit in the moment, right? Let's breathe in and out and calm down. This is the lower triangle. This is the higher triangle. And this is the heart. And in the lower triangle, we have chakras 1, 2, 3. This is chakra 4, 5, 6, and 7. And if we look at it like this, we may be able to see a connection between the reptilian brain, because you remember it's mostly about instincts and is mostly concerned with our survival and the fight or flight mechanisms. It's actually, sometimes they call it the 4 Fs: fight, flight, feeding. Feeding is food. Yeah, food is navel point. Navel point is linked to the digestive system and the stomach. And F for reproduction. You know what I mean. So the first, second, and third chakras, these are the chakras that when we operate from here, this is linked to the reptilian brain, because everything is a mirror of everything. And this is like a, how do you call that? Like a fractal. Yeah. Have you seen a fractal? Like one part of the fractal is the same as the total, like in a fern. One leaf of the fern is just like the whole fern. The same way, the whole ourselves, we are fractals. And so this area of the body with the first 3 chakras, they are like a reflection of this reptile structure here. So, and it operates also in the same way in the levels of priorities. Remember I mentioned if we are in a fight or flight situation, that takes priority over anything else. And so the other parts of the brain will shut down. Let's imagine that this was not so. Okay, imagine that this order of priorities didn't exist. And suddenly you are in front of a lion. And maybe let's imagine what would happen here in the higher layer. And we didn't perceive the lion as a threat because that's something from the lower layer, and the higher layer would look at the lion and say, what a beautiful creature. It's so majestic with the mane and look at the teeth, so sharp. This is like incredible, like evolution at its best. This is like the highest peak of evolution, that an animal that has grown to perfect its different systems to be able to eat other animals. It is a beautiful creature. Imagine that you go into these ramblings while the lion is in front of you, is going to eat you, right? And you're like, oh, so beautiful. I wish I could paint it. Oh, maybe I have some paper and pen here. I'm going to do a sketch of this beautiful beast. You know what's going to happen? You're going to be eaten. And if you're going to be eaten, your genes are not going to pass on to the next generation, thankfully, because that kind of human would not last very long, right? So there is a reason why this order of priorities have to be there, and why when the lower region of the brain triggers, the higher should be more disconnected. There is a reason, and it's based on survival, yeah? The evolution of a species, yeah? So that also translates in the levels of the chakras. So if we see that the first chakra is the fight or flight. The second one is reproduction. The third one is feeding. Now, you can see it in the animals. You see animals they have food, but suddenly a mate is available. They're going to stop eating food to go with the mate. Or they're even going to offer the food to the mate to mate with them. That's seen in monkeys quite often, yeah? But if the opportunity for reproduction is here, a mate is available, but a lion comes, you're going to run away. So, if your systems are working, that's what you should do, yeah? So, the first layer, the first chakra, has a priority over the second, has a priority over the third in the most primitive ways. And this is linked so to the reptilian brain that way. If we go a bit higher, we find the heart, and the heart, we can connect it in some way to the limbic system. That was the mammal brain. It's all right. We can leave it as limbic system, no? Because the heart is about, it's the beautiful things about the heart is love and devotion and compassion. But how often do we start with love and we end up into emotions? Yeah, we start connecting with the beautiful feeling of love, but very soon we go into the emotions associated with love, which actually, they come from much lower. They actually into the lower chakras. But at least, let's say that this brain, the limbic system connected to the mammal brain, I'm going to write it. Remember, the emotions were all to help you establish the culture of getting together into tribes and create communities. So this is the social brain. Remember, it's when mammals appear that the social aspects appear. So this is where the original, and the heart is all about being social. It's all about, we say the arms are an extension of the heart. So the arms want to hug, they want to handshake, they want to do things with the others. So this is how the second layer of the brain, being the mammal brain, is actually connected to this. The heart is an extension of the heart. It's kind of connected, isn't it? And then we have the higher three chakras, what we call the upper triangle. This is the lower triangle, and the upper triangle is pointing up. This is connected to the primate brain. And here we talked about the higher functions. And if we go through the survival and now we create communities, now we're going to want to communicate. That's the fifth chakra, that's the communication, that's the language, you remember? And then we're going to stimulate the third eye and the seventh chakra. All this is around the brain, so decision making and even, intuition, which is something that we can associate mostly to the prefrontal cortex, our capacity to perceive things even when they are not easily visible. They don't come from this area of the brain. What we see reflects here. The intuition is from seeing something, seeing the unseen, sometimes we say. Perceive what is unperceivable, So that's the higher function. So as we go higher with this upper triangle, we are stimulating the higher areas of the primate brain. And we could say even the prefrontal cortex, Even the higher functions of the 6th and the 7th chakra would be linked to this, the prefrontal cortex. So isn't it interesting? Isn't it curious that the different layers of the brain are connected in some ways to the chakras, and they are connected to the levels of consciousness? Because remember, reflex arc is unconscious. The reflexes on unconscious, the emotional reactions, they are subconscious. The automatic responses from the primates, they are semi-conscious. And as we move into the prefrontal cortex, kind of decision making good high decisions, that's the conscious part. Even the brain reflects the levels of consciousness that we can manifest. And that we can connect as well to the chakras. Isn't it great? I find it fascinating. I hope you do too. I hope you find an interesting connection here. I'm sure most of you had already heard about this or seen some of this, but hopefully connecting it to these other levels, this is what can make the difference. Because if we have an issue where we feel we are always in survival mechanism, then there is something happening here, So we can deal with the chakras, we can deal with this, because a blockage in one area is going to manifest in the other level. So some issue operating on this level is going to manifest as some issue on this level. So working through the chakras, we can work on the brain and the mind. So that's the connection that I wanted to get to. We will see more about this when we want to talk about, like GIY was asking, about releasing childhood trauma. How do we deal with that? Well, knowing these aspects of the layers and the chakras are going to help us later on to be able to deal with those issues and to find healing when it's difficult to do it otherwise. Now, where do we go on from here? We have seen the two hemispheres of the brain, and we have seen the layers of evolution of the brain. Now we would come into, let me just connect to the next videos that we have already recorded, and then we will catch on probably some following video on what will come afterwards. But so let me do this connection. The brain went through a number of evolutions. And all this is about Western science, yeah? And the science of understanding has also been evolving. This was about the brain. On the perspective of the mind, there has been an evolving in our understanding, starting from, if you go back to Plato and other philosophers, there was a primitive, certainly primitive understanding of the mind in some way. But our Western understanding of the mind, it's really just 150 years old or so. And it's mainly from Freud onwards that we start having good models to start working with. While if we look at yogic understanding of the mind, we can go back thousands of years, and we will do so. I'm looking forward to another video which I will record on the Samkhya perspective on the mind, or even coming from the Bhagavad Gita, Samkhya, Vedanta, up until nowadays, a modern understanding, yogic understanding of the mind. We will do this in some other time, yeah? But let's stay with the Western first. This mind course starts a lot with the Western, and we'll go much more into the Eastern. So staying with the Western, just as like the brain had an evolution, the mind had an evolution, coming from Jung, going onwards, Jung creating this model with the ego, the superego, and Jung actually reading all these Eastern texts like the Kundalini Upanishads and other classical texts and adopting them to psychology included aspects like the collective unconscious, which is very connected to some archetypal aspects in Vedanta, and so on and so forth. So we can see how the evolution of understanding of the mind has also evolved. But one thing of the model of the mind has been more helpful to understanding what's happening in the brain, and that's the levels of consciousness. So from here, we will connect to the next video that was already recorded. That was the 5 levels of consciousness, which show a Western perspective of different levels of the consciousness, linking it to the mind, because sometimes we call it subconscious mind or conscious mind or unconscious mind. Certainly, Freud talked about it like that. Jung talked about it like that as well. In that video, we don't talk about the collective unconscious, but I will come back to that because that's a very Eastern concept as well. We will come back to that when we go into the Eastern perspective on the evolution of the mind. So just pointing out that connection from this video now connects to the 5 levels of consciousness, which are showing kind of a modern understanding of the levels of consciousness, but from a Western perspective. Then the next video was connected to that one because I go into the negative, positive, and neutral mind, which is a concept that comes more from Yogi Bhajan. But, me being in the tradition of Kundalini Yoga, I thought it was interesting to explore it there at that moment. And then the video that will go on, those 2 are already recorded. They are already in the list. The one that we will do later will be about how the Eastern perspective on the levels of consciousness. So we will see the understanding from the Samkhya, from the Vedanta, and hopefully, maybe if I remember, I will connect it also to Jung's understanding of the collective unconscious and these things which are fascinating and give us a more deeper understanding of the brain, mind, consciousness level connection, and which, also can help us then to deal things with like trauma and how to deal with that. So I'm not going to stop the streaming, but this is the ending of the video that is going to be part of the Mind course. So for those who are from the video, thank you very much. And until next time, yes, thank you.